All right, well, hello and welcome to Big Data, Small Data, Making the Most of Data Available. I'm glad you could join us today for CARMA's webinar. I'm Jordan Goslin and I'm a marketing specialist with CARMA. We're a global media intelligence company providing monitoring and integrated analytics around the world. Today, we are joined by two hosts who have a lot of experience with data and how it can be used to improve business decisions and communications work. Neville Hobson is a communicator, blogger, and podcaster. For nearly 30 years, Neville has been a voice of experience and influence when it comes to speaking about digital technologies, disruptive change in workplaces and marketplaces, relevant trends to pay close attention to, and what it means for businesses. Since 2000, his career has focused on developing understanding of complex business, communication, and transformation issues that embrace social, digital, and cognitive technologies. He connects this experience with a career in traditional public relations, marketing communications, employee compensation and benefits communication, and investor relations. In January 2018, he joined the Internet Society as a social media strategist, providing strategic thinking and leadership in social media in support of the Society's goal of an internet that is open, globally connected, trustworthy, and secure. Neville's co-presents the monthly Small Data Forum podcast that he started with Thomas Stokla and Sam Knowles in the summer of 2016, the goal of which is to help listeners make big data less intimidating, more actionable, and thus more valuable. In early 2017, he began co-presenting a monthly edition of the Hobson and Holtz Report podcast that he first started with Shell Holtz in 2005. He is a founding fellow of SNCR, and for nearly 20 years, he was an accredited member and volunteerism leader of the International Association of Business Communicators. You can learn more about Neville at his website, www.nevillehobson.com. Thanks for joining us, Neville.
You're welcome.
And joining Neville is Jen Singzimes-Phillips. Jen is the Director of Marketing Communications with CARMA. She has worked in communications and public affairs for more than 20 years. Her background includes work in electoral politics, government, lobbying, and public affairs PR work. She also brings a decade of experience in digital and social communications and media analysis to her role at CARMA. In 2000, she joined the public affairs practice group at Fleishman Hillard in the firm's corporate headquarters in St. Louis, Missouri. Her role at FH included grassroots communications, coalition building, and communication strategy for clients with public affairs concerns. After leaving FH, she worked with them on various projects as an independent contractor. She joined Custom Scoop, an online monitoring and analysis software company, in 2006. There, she managed a team of media analysts who provided business intelligence to Fortune 500 companies through monitoring and analysis of the then emerging field of social media. In 2014, she founded 4L Strategies, and in 2018, she joined CARMA. Thanks for joining, Jen.
Thank you, Jordan.
So Jen and Neville are going to discuss how to use available data to improve business and communications decisions. They'll cover differences between big and small data, tips to collect and manage available data, and examples of organizations using data to make informed decisions. There'll be time for attendee questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to submit any questions you may have throughout the session in the chat box at the bottom of the control panel. Additionally, a recording of the session will be available on CARMA's YouTube channel following the session, and the slide deck will be available on our SlideShare account. So I'm going to hand it over to Jen and Neville now and let them discuss big data, small data, and how to use the data that's available to you.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Okay, well, when we talk about data, the first thing that comes to mind is, we hear these terms, big data, and there's mountains of information out there. We're all collecting information. You sit on Amazon for half an hour, click around, buy a few things. Believe it or not, that entire click stream is considered data, and you've got millions of people sitting at home doing the same thing. There's just so much of it, and most organizations collect a ton of information, a lot of data, but they really struggle on how to figure out what they're going to do with it, how to use it effectively. So Neville, I think that where we need to start is, just defining what we're going to be talking about.
It is, Jen. It would help, wouldn't it? The term big data is intimidating to many people. Those two words, big data. It's also misused hugely by many, notably politicians who like to talk about big data as this kind of thing in society that surrounds us all. And there's some truth in parts of that. Big data, if you're in the IT industry, you will certainly get a lot of the technical description of what big data is, and it tends to be quite technical. Data sets, voluminous and complex. You'll hear words like petabytes and zettabytes to signify the sheer volume of it. And that is a very true element, that the amount of data, the volume of data, is getting larger and larger every day. And it's hard really to get a handle on how large it is. when you hear words like zettabytes, what does that mean to the average person? I heard a great description not long ago that translated those technical terms into something that normal people can kind of grasp quite readily, even though it does sound quite extraordinary when you think that the quantity of data that we see every day is equivalent of hundreds of millions of Harry Potter books every single day. And that certainly gives you a sense of the scale of it. And it's getting bigger all the time, Jen.
Yep, it's incredible. So now that we have an idea of what big data, really is, and when we're talking about big data, there are a lot of different layers. It varies from structured to unstructured, and we'll get to that in a minute. But really, the question is, how are businesses already using this information? We see a lot of news reports about, this company is using big data to create more coupons for people. It's almost feels like it doesn't matter when it's reduced to something like that. But there are such incredible examples of really, really sharp work that is being done applying big data to small and medium-sized business problems. I know we've talked about some different examples, but I'll turn it over to you.
Well, some simple examples, really, to give a sense of the scale of it, from large to small. It readily come to mind that I think many people would recognize it, even though they might not think of big data. One example, online banking. If you use online banking at your local bank, that enables you to perform the kinds of transactions that each of us, from a personal level as well as a business point of view, are now so used to. In the UK, this is common practice to manage all your financial systems through an internet connection to your account, a secure connection that lets you do all the things you want to do: make payments, manage your deposits, look at moving money between accounts, making transfers, you name it. Just the simple facility of managing accounts. The scale of it is huge for most banks. If you imagine they're doing this for millions of customers, and this is 24/7 typically, that this has got to be online. It's crunching numbers at a terrific scale, that when you click something or tap something on your mobile device, within seconds, if not milliseconds, you get the result. So you've done a calculation, or you've asked to see a balance, or you're doing transfer. There's one example. Another would be your medical records. If you have access on a simple level to your local doctor's surgery, the medical practice who you go to when you have a cold or you need an injection or some kind of medication, that permits you in a secure connection to look at your medical records, the same data that the doctors see or the hospital sees if you're having hospital treatment of some kind. There are issues surrounding all of this as it evolves, not the least of which is data privacy, and that's a big part of looking at concerns related to big data and how to make people feel more comfortable about the concept of it all. But those two small examples, I think most people can relate to, Jen.
I agree. Those are excellent examples, and I've done some looking and found some interesting, smaller business examples on how big data is helping smaller businesses solve problems. One of which is there was a zoo, I think it's out in the Seattle area, who used big data past, I think, decades worth of weather reports and layered it on top of their own information, their own internal data, and figured out how weather affected their attendance patterns. And when you have the weather affecting attendance patterns, they were then able to take that information and do predictive scheduling. And this allowed them to, schedule the right number of employees on a daily basis. And, the first few times this happened, they're like, yeah, okay, you guys, maybe it's a fluke. Maybe you're just, hit a hot streak where you're scheduling the right number of people. But it's been that way over and over again, and they've gotten better and better at it. So they have the right number of people scheduled to work for the crowds that they predict on any given day. And it's kind of tremendous what predictive analytics can do for the way a business itself can run. So I think
yeah,
go ahead.
It's a great example, and there are plenty like that. Most of them at larger scale, to be honest.
Right.
But that's getting within the reach of smaller businesses, not simply enterprise type organizations. Literally almost every day, that the accessibility to the tools to help you crunch huge numbers, put it in real simple terms. The weather is a great one you mentioned. There's a great case study on one large company that owns well-known ice cream brands around the world, Unilever, where they, at huge scale, imagine that they need to know with some certainty what the weather's going to be like, 3 to 4 weeks ahead. If it's a big heat wave coming, they need to ramp up production of ice cream and then get them to market. And they need to do that with some confidence. So the data availability that enables them to perform similar to what you mentioned, Jen, in a predictive sense, but at huge scale. And you're looking at gleaning or gathering insights from data all over the place, the weather services, satellites, you name it, GPS related data, so they can look at how they kind of localize what they need to do by particular market sector, and more of that data is becoming available for uses like this. So typically you'd need to have specialized software to do this, provided mostly targeted at large enterprise organizations, but it is becoming accessible by smaller organizations all the time. So there are tools from the likes of IBM, for instance, using artificial intelligence, and that's something we'll touch on later when we talk about trends, that enable this data to be analyzed at very high velocity, very high speed indeed, and give you pretty accurate results from that. That enables you then to make the decisions you need to know, which is why, of course, you want access to that data to give you the insights, so you can make the business decisions along the lines of the example you mentioned, Jen.
Exactly. And we'll get to how that helps communicators in a little bit. But I think we should probably click onto the next slide and talk a little bit about structured versus unstructured data, so that people, I think communicators especially, we know we're supposed to know all this stuff, but it kind of gets pushed to the backside. And if you don't understand the fundamental of the type of data that you're talking about, it can get overwhelming very quickly.
It's true. And looking at the slide, it's the data at the right-hand side and what's known as unstructured data that sits on, some call it the dark web. It's the kind of thing that is the one that's growing at a phenomenal pace, and yet we don't often know what that is. But be sure it's coming. Everyone's heard of the Internet of Things, the jokey things like the refrigerator that can tell you to get more milk. All of these things are coming. Sensory data. Sensors are being affixed and applied to all sorts of hardware devices these days, things that didn't have that kind of thing before, that can alert you or another device to an event or something like that. That's becoming more common, and these are becoming readily accessible on all sorts of devices, ranging from children's toys to devices you might have around the home, to what you've got in your office. So that's all coming. Images, that's another big thing that's coming. A video too, for that matter. All of these things are data, and yet they are typically not readily accessible to glean insights from what's in that data. And also augmented reality, virtual reality, these newer technologies that are exciting a lot of consumers in particular. So to contrast the two, data that's coming on the right-hand side, data you possess on the left-hand side, so-called structured data. Why is it called structured? Because you know it. It's therefore structured. It's in databases, it's in spreadsheets, it's in a variety of places you know about. Think about customer records, employee records for that matter, institutional expertise, some of the subject matter expertise written by people in your own organization that you've got in a database somewhere, or it's in a document repository someplace online within your own organization, so you know about this stuff. So that is accessible. You know what that is. It's the stuff you don't know that is actually more interesting, because now you are able to do something about that. So the middle one in this slide, data outside your firewall, is the immediate thing that we're now getting access to using some of the tools available to us that aren't rocket science by any means. They might have looked that way perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, but today they don't. So the data outside your firewall, news, events, weather, we talked about weather, geospatial data, social media. These are things that actually you don't know until they've happened. So a news story, until it's published, you have no idea of what that news is unless you happen to be at the place where the news is taking place. And so a news story is published, then you know about it. How do you take advantage of that? That gives you an advantage in your business, or some kind of additional insight that enables you to take quicker action than a competitor might do, or take advantage of an immediate opportunity that presents itself simply because you heard about it here. How are you doing this? Are you kind of sitting paying attention to all this, waiting for something to happen? Of course you're not. You can't do that. That's what some of these tools can do. So this is actually a good example of saying big data is actually all of this. This is what big data is. And that fits with some of the evolving descriptions that we see in places like Wikipedia and elsewhere, that in a linear fashion define what big data is. Lengthy text that sometimes make it hard to really grasp. So exactly what is this? So in essence, you could say big data is data you have right now within your own organization, plus data that is accessible outside your firewall, because you know this stuff exists or will exist when an event occurs. News happens all the time. Social media, people are writing posts, they're tweeting, they're liking, they're doing all sorts of things. And then the data that you're not quite sure what it is, Internet of Things type data, all these devices that you know they're coming or they're out there, but you have no idea what they're connecting. And how does that value, how do you get value out of that? The images and the video I find most interesting, because typically it's very difficult to analyze an image and know what it is, to describe it. You've got the file name, you have a little bit of metadata perhaps that most software tools can access, but deeper than that, it's trickier. And yet now there are software tools in particular that lets you do that. And of course, we're now moving slightly towards that trend area where artificial intelligence is beginning to play a big role in this kind of data analysis. So that's what's coming. So all of this fits together into a big pool that's called big data, that now you, the average business person or communicator, has the ability to access this and gain the insights from it. So it's an interesting place we sit in today.
Exactly. And I'll throw one more in there that oftentimes people don't think about it as data, but after having read a book about it, I am completely in line, which is Google search information.
Right.
I recently read the book Everybody Lies by Seth Stephens-Davidowitz, and it was absolutely fascinating, how he took and analyzed Google searches, because there are a few places where we are quite as honest as we are when we're sitting alone and asking Google questions in that plain white box. So Google search too can be a provider of predictive information, which I found to be absolutely fascinating. But think of how many Google searches occur every day.
Utterly true, Jen. That's one area I think that is really missed by many people who don't realize that the kind of searching can draw out myriad useful pieces of data that you can perform this kind of thing yourself quite easily. So search data basically tells us how stories are found, I suppose, is one way of describing it, and that I think is quite a good way of looking at it. But search, you can actually, there are tools that will perform search and gather the data for you. The simplest one, Google Alerts, if you've ever used that. Most people know about it. Too few people use it in any kind of constructive way to help inform their business planning. And it's a very, very useful tool. It's certainly not enough to rely on, but it's a great one to use in conjunction with other tools that help you find information automatically. When something occurs, it alerts you based on what you've told it to pay attention to. And that really is a very good example of search.
And one of the other ones he had in his book was Google Trends, where you could almost get a real-time look at how news is affecting people, how they're responding to it, what they then search for, which is fascinating. And Merriam-Webster has taken a bit of that too, in that when people start searching on different terms, they have a tendency to tweet out, here's the word of the day, or here's the most searched term today. Sometimes it has a political or a current events slant to it. But what people look for gives you an insight into what interests them. And that is valuable.
I agree totally. You can add to that social media data that tells us how people, or rather what they say about us, or the things that are of interest to us. The news that was important to us, how do they share all of that? So most people are aware of some of these things, but there's ways to make use of this in a manner that truly is genuinely valuable to your business planning. And so you've mentioned some examples there. These are free tools that are openly available to anyone. There are lots of tools like this. It just requires a little more effort to make use of them, but that is eminently doable for any business.
Okay. What is next for us, Jordan? All right, where is data hiding? Oh, this is one of my favorites because people do not realize how much data they are probably already collecting within their own organizations. And sometimes it takes a little poking and prodding, and sometimes people don't even think about what information that's kept in file cabinets that has been stored for years. It can be valuable information. Again, to highlight an illustration of this, one of the stories that I came across about a company that had contracted with a data management firm. Basically, they help in taking all of those, piles and piles of paper files that you've collected for 20, 30, 40 years and get it all into a usable format. And you have to think about, some companies have been around for a long time. They've moved from, the 5.25-inch floppy disks, or, from files to the 5.25-inch floppy disks to the 3.5-inch floppy disks, and on and on and on. And now we're carrying, more information around in a thumb drive than you could fit on an entire computer a couple of years ago. And these data management companies come in and help companies standardize all of that information. One of the firms that they highlighted was a real estate rental firm in I think it was South Carolina, that had, just stacks and stacks of information about which cottages were rented and when. And they took that information, they got it all formatted and standardized. They layered weather and economic information, I believe, on top of it. And they are now able to predict with a high degree of accuracy which cabins will be rented during what week. It allows them to optimize how much they're going to charge. It helps them lower their vacancy rates. And if you're thinking like a communicator, you take all of that information and you can then tie in your communications, your PR to local media. When do you want to highlight the resort, when maybe when the attendance is a little lower? It helps all of the predictability or prediction that you can wrap into your business plan, then gets transferred over to your communications plan. So there's a lot of information out there that you probably have that you just need to get standardized.
Yeah, exactly. And indeed, this fits very, very clearly with this whole thing about structured and unstructured data, the data you know about, the data you don't know about. And you can find a lot of this data you don't know about through the examples you've mentioned. I mean, Google Analytics is a terrific tool to look at your website and your blog. That gives you a great deal of insights in terms of traffic, as it were, what's happening on your sites, for lead generation, all the business planning that you need to do. And I would say many, I won't use the word most, but I would say many businesses fully understand the concept of tools like Google Analytics. Media monitoring tools, a terrific example too, of the kinds of things that pay attention to the things you're interested in. I would also add in there social media platform analytics that look at the data across social platforms. So a good example would be just Twitter, for instance, where I can't tell you how many times I'm surprised when I talk to business people who are unaware of the depth of really useful insights you can glean from Twitter's own analytics of what's going on with your Twitter handle. So if you're running a business Twitter account, this is an easy way to get a sense of how your Twitter handle is performing if you have a strategy for it that supports your business objectives. Which kind of content works well? What do people do? How do they interact with your content? I mean, even stuff that is really useful on analyzing the clicks and the taps on a particular tweet. So if someone's seeing it on a desktop computer or laptop and they've got a mouse, they click. If it's on a mobile device, they'll tap on the screen. Which bits get tapped? Do they tap on the profile? Do they tap on the image? Do they tap on the link, the hashtag, anything else that you've got in there? Twitter can tell you the detail of that. And that kind of thing is really useful to understand how it performs and what you've got to do to improve what you're doing. And the other platforms, the ones that are typically used in business, LinkedIn, for instance, Instagram increasingly for photos and video, even Facebook, all of these platforms have their own analytic systems. The downside oftentimes, in my experience, is they're all slightly different how they work. The efficiency of how they load the pages and all that stuff is iffy most of the time. Twitter's about the best one, I would say. You've also then got tools you can use through a publishing platform. If you use one of those tools like Hootsuite, for instance, to manage all your social media publishing to your various platforms, they have analytics. They've improved radically in the recent year or two, and that's another avenue open to you. My recommendation is use all of these things, and you will glean some ready insights into what's happening. So you will uncover data you didn't know existed. And this is a great example, Jen, of the kind of data that is unstructured that you can give structure to when you access it. So it's really handy to make use of stuff like this.
Well, and I think that's probably where a lot of people, have a tendency to say, well, that's all well and good, but how on earth am I going to get all of that, different disparate pieces of data into a usable format? It kind of becomes the bigger problem. Okay, so I've identified all the different pieces of information that we are collecting. How on earth am I going to make heads or tails of this? Sampling is one way. People can, just if there's too much information, too much data, sample it. This is a perfectly acceptable way of looking at a large pile of information. And I think that people tend to think, well, what if I'm just looking, what if I don't get a good enough picture? And they would seemingly rather be swamped with too much information than miss something. And I guess, I'm here to reassure everybody that if you have enough information, if you've got enough data there, a sample will be sufficient. It's when you don't have a whole lot of information and you take a sample that you have a problem.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, I think. I tend to think of it as keep it as simple as possible. I mean, one of the things that we talk about in the podcast that Jordan mentioned in the intro, the Small Data Forum podcast that I do with Thomas Stoker and Sam Knowles, that looks at big data. I mean, we're three people who have a strong interest in this. We're all communicators. So we're looking at it from a marketing communications point of view, typically, to help break it all down into understandable chunks. And every time we do our monthly show, I think about this rationale, if you will. How do we talk about big data in ways that make it sound, you can get a handle on? And your point there is very interesting. How do you do all this? How do you bring this somewhere that you can make use of it? That's an interesting way of looking at it. I tend to look at it slightly differently in the sense that if you look at what big data can do for you and see the possibilities, finding out how to do that becomes easier to get a grip on. So it could even be something simple like thinking about your social media data, Twitter being a good example. Download the data from that platform because they offer a raw download and you stick it in an Excel spreadsheet. Then you can model it quite simply. So on a very simple level, and it doesn't matter if, say, you look at, okay, let's look at the last 90 days worth of tweets. And it happens to be, you've got a Twitter account that is very active and very prominent, and you've got 100,000 tweets in there or something like that. Doesn't matter. It's not the size of it in this context. It's manageable. Don't think of that size. Just think of that chunk of data. You stick it in your Excel, and you model it. And you can look at things from so many different ways that if you use Excel, you'll know easily how to do this, and you will gain value from this if you've never done it before. You will see things that you never knew because you're looking at it from a slightly different angle. And to me, that's one great way to think, how am I going to do this? What tools have I got? You've then got another way to move, which is to use one of the services that are available out there that give you the work. They will do the work on your behalf, so you just pay them the fee or whatever it is. It's all in the cloud. That's very common indeed, and indeed that gives a small business typically the same kind of power, let's say, as a large enterprise, because you literally have access to similar kinds of technology. And if you look at organizations like IBM, for instance, with the Watson artificial intelligence tool that is applying that to social media analytics, there's some very interesting stuff going on there in areas that some of the simpler tools can't do yet. Things like human behavior, social behavior actually, and sentiment analysis with some confidence. So there we're moving into a slightly different area where you're looking at machine learning and all that AI type stuff that we keep reading about in the newspapers and the various magazines. But that is part of what's coming in trends. I tend to look at that as helping you augment your own intelligence, let's say, where some of the serious number crunching on huge data sets can be done by these algorithms, leaving you with the results, literally, that lets you apply your intelligence to that, not the number crunching, because that's what computers are good at. That's not what we're good at. We're much better at drawing the insights from the analyzed data. So that's a positive way that that some of this automation that's coming will help us. But it also means that we need to understand where all this is going. We truly do need to get a good sense of the way in which big data is so pervasive in our lives, both personally and from a business point of view, that you can't really make many confident business decisions without doing the analytics, running the numbers on it, as it were. And now you've got so much big data, truly, that you can't do this without the help of tools that are becoming increasingly sophisticated. So here we're sitting in 2018, and everything we're talking about is perfectly fine today. In 5 years, though, we're going to need something a lot more powerful, because our competitors will be doing the same, and the tools are evolving all the time. So it's going to be interesting. It's certainly not without the kind of concerns we have still on privacy, on data protection. Every day it seems to me there's stories of bad guys hacking this, or cryptocurrencies take over your machine to do all their mining. I mean, where's it all going? You've got to be aware of things like this, and I think responsible organizations will be paying attention to things like that. There's also regulatory frameworks. Think about what's about to hit us out of the European Union. The GDPR is an acronym most people are now familiar with, a regulatory framework that is aimed at protecting the rights of people on what happens to their data in the European Union, and that affects anyone around the world doing business in Europe. So things like that we're going to see more of in other jurisdictions too. So that's part of our landscape, Jen, in the big data sense, that we have the data itself, we have what we want to do with that data, we have then the means by which we analyze that data and glean the insights from it, and then we hit against the various legal elements, because these cross borders, and therein is one dilemma in modern society, where geographic limitations are kind of outdone by the digital virtual world, and there is no easy solution to this. That's a fact. So I say people don't worry too much about that. It's something if you're a business, you have to comply with these regulations. So fine, just make sure you do. Get on with thinking about what you're going to do with that data. And again, that word big, park it over here. Just think about the data and look at it in small chunks. I make it sound easy, don't I, Jen? Really?
You do. But as you were talking about, things like regulatory frameworks and the whole, privacy issues and things like that, I was reminded of one example that I came across not too long ago that really kind of highlighted, once again, the important role that communicators can have in this new world, and that is facilitating the communications between the companies or the organizations or the municipal bodies that are using big data, and making communities and stakeholders feel comfortable about it. And the example that was used was Allegheny County in Pennsylvania they've been using data analysis across a number of state databases to help predict at-risk families. Basically, and it's a horrible thing to think about, but they track child abuse and statistics and things like that, and they're able to figure out, okay, when we see these factors, these 12 factors can really lead us to believe that we could have a neglect situation. And in a way, that's kind of a creepy thing. It's you're collecting information saying, okay, based on this, and this, these computers are saying that this family is at risk of harming or neglecting their child. But what Allegheny County did that was so smart was they spent a lot of time communicating with the local community and the stakeholders in that community, working with them to reassure them that this was not the computer prints out a list and then they trot out and put all these children into foster homes. They got the message out, and it's one of the most successful relationships in the country between the local community and the Division of Family Services, or I'm not sure if that's exact terminology that they use there, but it really did highlight the role that communicators can play in translating big data.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make there, that the role of the communicator in this kind of element related to big data. So the communication of what's happening, who's doing what, the reassurance element of that is key. And I can think of examples along the lines of what you've mentioned that I know about over here in the UK, for instance, where you see when something erupts in the mainstream media that people are upset about something or there's an issue. Usually it turns out that there is no issue, it just was not communicated well. And this to me is an example of where communicators really can play a key role in ensuring that those communication channels are well defined, and that the story is told to the right people in the right way. We see too often, though, that isn't the case, but the ones that are good examples we don't hear about because there aren't any issues. So that's the watchword for communicators: get your channels clearly defined and tell your story well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, solving problems with data. We talk a lot about setting goals and measurement as communicators, and as long as we're tracking things back to business goals, we'll be able to tell our story and prove our worth as PR professionals. Data can help every aspect of an organization, including communications. So finding the right data sets is important, but I've found that one of the more underutilized things is developing the right questions to glean insight. What do you think about this ability to solve your problems with data? What are we missing?
I don't think we're missing much in truth, Jen. I guess it's a lot to do with realizing the fact that data is a key part of your communication plan. So I'm reminded actually, as I'm talking here, of our friends at Shift Communications some years ago, when they became, I think I'm right in saying, the PR industry's first PR firm to be certified by Google for Google Analytics. And that got me thinking a lot, that data is a key element of PR. And indeed, PR is informed by data analytics. So your strategic thinking, whether you're an agency or whether you're the client, what you're doing in communicating with the people you need to communicate with must be informed by confident analysis of the available data. And that sounds to me so logical saying that. I'm just amazed people don't do this all the time. But we're on the cusp of something emerging that's moving this way, and Shift was a very good example. I'm not aware of other PR firms who are Google certified in the same way. But that, to me, you ask the question, why have they done that? Because they can see quite clearly, they believe that data is a key element in being able to provide the kind of service that you need to provide to your clients from a PR point of view. Indeed, I would argue other communication disciplines as well. So what can big data and PR do? Lots of lots of different things. Actually, we've touched on many of them, but I can think of some fundamentals, for instance, where you've got analyzed data, the insights you glean from that let you know who's leading conversations about you or your client or whatever the topic is that you're interested in. What are the best timings to put out stories on behalf of your client? What's the best days for engaging with the media, conducting media relations, good old traditional media relations? When is the best time to do that kind of thing? Audience behavior trends and the predictive analytics you mentioned earlier, how best to address a crisis, for instance. So these to me are fundamentals of PR practice, and yet you can improve that or even enhance what you're offering by informing your planning by very clear and confident data analytics. So that to me is why you should be using data as part of your communication plan.
I agree completely. And I think that a lot of times as communicators, we get, kind of maybe even fib a little bit to ourselves, say, well, PR is about, relationships with human beings. We don't really need to get all, into this data sets and that sort of thing. But it really helps shorten the life cycle. And, if you can get to the right information quickly, if you can get to the right story at the right time, if you can figure out when your press release is going to have the best impact, you will become a more efficient practitioner.
Some people would say, well, we do that already, to which I would argue, but you don't really. You don't the way you need to in a digital world, that you need to know all the things that you don't think about, that you haven't thought about that, or you have and you thought, no, I can't get that. Yes, you can. And this is all the things related to, as an example, what we talked about the weather, about understanding the predictive nature of weather in 3 weeks' time to make decisions about making more ice cream and getting it to market, and all the peripheral activity that surrounds all of that, the communication, lining up the advertising, whatever it might be, the social media outreach, all that. So yes, it's very, very important that you do this. So it's a new world now, and here's a tip for PR folks. And one thing I know from just observing, that if you are looking for a senior position, let's say in a PR firm these days, and I wouldn't say every PR firm, but most PR firms I could think of, that if your CV or your resume includes a good chunk of your ability to prove that you have solid experience in data analytics, you enhance your desirability to your potential new employer. And then I took a look when I first heard about this or saw examples of this. I took a look around, this is about 6 months ago, at some job opportunities in PR firms. And guess what? Nearly all the senior roles being advertised sought people with data analytics experience. So that's becoming something very marketable, but not just that, essential in this business, that you've got to have experience. And that could be what I mentioned earlier, knowing how to get the insights out of your Twitter data dump, looking at LinkedIn, and there's a whole different way they do their analytics, understanding how to get the insights from that as well. That is sufficient. That's a starter point. So, this is the way it's going, and you need to be up to speed with this stuff.
Okay. I think we are. Yeah. Oh, yes. This is what we need to do. We need to think big, right? Learn and adapt, grow.
Yep, we do. And this slide actually is just some examples of some further examples in areas that may not seem obvious when we're talking about public relations and best timings to release certain stories. And that's the bread and butter work of your average PR, I think. This is taking it slightly differently, but data is a driver of this. So if I just quickly explain what we're seeing on the slide here. So the red circle, grow knowledge from data. And that's where you convert the insights you're getting out of that data. You're analyzing it for a particular purpose, but it will give you inroads or entry points into all sorts of other purposes that you can use that enable you to look for differentiations in how you do your business, how you operate, how you offer your service, how you reach your customers, how you deal with customer service, all of that enable you to act quickly on something that could be game-changing because you've suddenly seen something in the data that you hadn't noticed before that give insight into how you run your business. The blue one, enhancing your expertise, to me is a very interesting one. When you've got subject matter experts within your business, and they've all got knowledge in a certain thing. In which case, you've got all that information somewhere. In which case, if you publicly make it available, typically, you then add that to that massive big data pool out there, because it will get discovered. It gets discovered, it is discoverable, and it helps you position yourself in a different way than you otherwise would have done without an active campaign to do this. And that's not typically how this kind of thing works anymore. The discoverability isn't as a result of you mounting a PR campaign or an advertising campaign. It's the kind of stuff that shows up in search results. Whether it's organic or whether you're paying to do all this doesn't really matter. That's how this digital landscape works largely. So as we've described, when you're looking for these huge data sets, or you're accessing them to do something with them, a lot of it, particularly the unstructured data, is from, in a sense, auto discovery. It's kind of out there finding things related to the keywords that you've made, that you've defined, or key phrases, or indeed looking for pattern matching, the patterns between meaning, even between different words and phrases, and finding the connections with that. It's becoming far more sophisticated. And so this helps you be discovered by others. So it's in a sense a kind of a sleeping marketer out there working for you. But you've got the expertise, and so many organizations have all of this and they don't realize it, or if they do, they don't know what else they could do with it other than the internal uses they have for it. So there's an opportunity where data will help you uncover that. And the final one, learning and adapting, in the green circle, is transforming everything. When you know that what you're learning from your analysis of the data that you've got access to, that help you in some ways, will help you in other ways too, when you realize that it helps you learn. It helps your employees in your organization learn things they otherwise could not have learned. That gives them pointers to information. So you should encourage that kind of use within your organization. It opens up these different ways that, as I call this slide title, reimagine. It lets you reimagine what's possible. So big data can be a huge eye-opener in ways that are unexpected for you.
I agree. And, I think this is a great slide to kind of wrap up on, because I think that, as communicators, we've kind of been bombarded with the messages that we need to, measure, and we need to do all of these things to reinforce, our place at the table and the C-suite and that sort of thing, and to prove our budget. And really, every aspect of data collection is designed to inform insight, and being able to use that insight, we're trying to make the organization better. Everything that we continue to do will allow us to continue to learn, adapt more, be better the next time, be better the time after that, be better the time after that. There is a reason for data collection. There is a reason for data analysis. There is a reason that we're looking at this, and it all pulls together if we look at it from that angle.
It does. It does. There is so much to choose what you spend your time and attention on. And as we've mentioned at the very beginning, it is so easy to be put off by the two words, big data. But when you look at that huge jigsaw puzzle, to truly understand that there are ways of getting at the data that you need in your particular part of your organization, if it's a big company, or your business if you are a smallish business, that shouldn't put you off trying to make use of it. And as we've seen, there are many tools and methods open to you to do just that, so you can benefit from this. And in the communication business, we need to be informed well on what we're doing, whether for our employers or for our clients, and data analytics is definitely the way to go with that.
Agreed.
Great. Thank you, guys. So we're just going to allot the last 10 minutes or so to some attendee questions. So I was wondering if you could start by talking about tools a little bit more. You touched on tools that you use to analyze data. Particularly, Jen, you had the real estate example. Could you talk more about the type of tools that you would use to analyze data, and what kind of tools may have been used in that real estate example?
Well, the real estate example is actually a case study by a firm that that does this for you. So it's probably not a great example of a tool that's available, on a free go out and download type of thing. But it does point out that, if you are in a position like the real estate company where you have lots of disparate formats of data, there can be a reluctance, I think, to invest the money to get everything collected together and get it into a usable format. It will be probably a fairly astonishing number, but think about how I think that the case study said that they were able to recover the money that they invested in the data standardization in a year, and they had predicted it would take 5 years for them to meet that. So it's identifying the problem, which is, oh, we have lots of different types of data. I'm sure we could use it, but it's all, it's basically a wreck. Figuring out how much money it would cost to get it into usable format and what you're going to do with the information once it is standardized. So you have to have an idea of the business problem that you're trying to solve and figure out how it's going to affect your profitability. And then going ahead, making the decision, going forward with it, and tracking success. And they did all of these things, and it worked out great for them. So unfortunately, it's not a free tool, but there are firms out there that can help you.
Mm-hmm.
Neville, did you have any ideas?
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very interesting, because my view on it would be most of the examples I know about are exactly as you said, Jen. They're a paid service in the cloud someplace that lets you do all these wonderful things that we've been touching on in our conversation today. I would say my recommendation would be for any small to medium-sized business is to consider those, because for a number of simple reasons. If you're looking at something that is part of your business intelligence or your business planning, that you're looking to give you all the insights that you need to make business decisions on, it would make sense to go that route if you don't have the resource on the payroll to do it for you. And frankly, I know few small businesses who have people on their staff who do this. Now, we touched earlier, I would say, on the fact that you don't need kind of scientific grade analytics to make decisions on. Often it's a sense of what's happening is good enough. It's not even the 80-20 rule. You don't even need 80% a lot of the time. You just need indicators to show you. So that's the kind of stuff you would do. I do this all the time myself. And so, I know how to do Twitter and how to get all that data out of the various social platforms. So I can do that. I would say it is still quite time consuming. So if time is money, then you would be a better route probably is going to be to find the right kind of partner to work with you on doing this for you, to provide it to you as a service. In the PR business, we have lots of companies who could do this kind of thing. So find the right one. So hence recommendations, all that kind of route you need to go down. But to get the results, maybe it does need to be looked at from that point of view. What are you trying to achieve? What do you want out of this? You would like to gain insights into this and this and this to help you make your business planning, in which case it then comes down to, fine, are you able to do this yourself with the tools you've got? Do you have the resource and the time availability to do it? How much is the value of that? In which case, might it not be more cost effective to hire someone to do it for you? You then can look at tools such as, I've mentioned a couple of times, IBM's tool. I think it is very good. I used to work at IBM, as I think you know, Jen. I'm not influenced by that. It is genuinely an outstanding tool. There are others like it on the market. It's what I call enterprise level type of a tool, yet it is openly available to anyone, even an individual, to sign up to and try it out. And this is, to me, the indicator of where this is going in terms of data analytics. As we get exposed to more data, particularly that unstructured data I mentioned a couple of times, we're going to need more sophisticated tools to help us. So this is in the area of the trends that we could mention of where all this is going. There are examples of plenty already of organizations that have employed artificial intelligence tools, algorithms, to conduct analytics of big data. instead of people doing it. And of course, the focus of many is what happens to all those employees? Are they going to be let go? That's a huge debate that will be ongoing for a long time, I'm sure. But the reality is that some of those things are happening like that, in which case you need to be aware of that. But you also need to see how can you take advantage of some of that now. And so that is part of the decision making that organizations have to go through, and what's the best way to get the result they're after. And so, you know, the homebrew effect of doing it yourself is fine, but if you're making business plans on that, a better route might well be to go with one of the services available to you that cost money.
Right. And to kind of just give an absurd example of why I said, you know, you have to kind of think of what it is what your business objectives and goals are. I mean, there's so much information and so much data you can track. You can track, you know, how much paper you go through, how many paper clips you use, you know, how many subscriptions to magazines that the company is pulling it, like how much coffee they go through. None of that might help you from a cost perspective. You might be able to address, you know, maybe we could buy, you know, fewer paper clips and still have our papers adequately affixed to one another, but it isn't going to help you make a long-term business decision about which cottages to rent during what weeks at what price. So it's knowing what information and what data sets you need is kind of a core function of making sure that you have an outcome that you're comfortable with and happy with.
Exactly right. You can't afford to cut corners on something like this as it becomes, in a sense, to quote an old-fashioned phrase, business critical. It's an essential aspect of your business planning, and so you need to make sure you do it right. And that, I believe, is becoming a much more important point to make a decision on, as we are seeing more and more of this data surrounding us every single day. So we don't want to find we're overwhelmed by it. We don't want to find either that we are hiring someone to do something that costs a huge amount of money and the benefit is negligible. You've got to pick your right method, and that often requires a little bit of advice too to help you decide that. So, you know, not to scare anyone here, frankly. This is not about, okay, it's going to cost you a fortune to get it. It's not at all. It's deciding what is it you want to achieve out of this. And it could well be, when you answer the questions that you will ask yourself, that the example I mentioned of getting all the data from your social media platforms is great. You could do that yourself. You might need help in analyzing it, in which case, is it better to put it as a package to the person to do the data number crunching and the analytics, or work with you on doing it? There are many ways you can do this. But coming back to the point I made earlier about Shift Communications being certified by Google, that to me is a good indicator. If you were to look at a firm to help you, look for someone who's certified in this by someone who is reputable, let's say. That gives you a sense of where that's going. I would expect to see more of that in the coming years, Jen, where we'll suddenly find that in addition to PR practitioners or general communicators being certified in some way related to their profession and their craft, that will now include something like certified in data analytics. So that gives you a sense of how this whole ecosystem is moving, certainly in the business we're in.
Great.
All right, thank you. So we're actually almost exactly at our hour mark. So we're going to wrap up for today. Our hosts' email addresses are here in case you'd like to follow up with any additional questions. We also have CARMA's Twitter handles and their website, so we invite you to connect with us there. As mentioned previously, the recording of the session will be available on CARMA's YouTube channel, and the slide deck will be available on our SlideShare account. I'd like to thank our attendees for joining us today, and I'd like to thank our hosts for a really informative session. We hope to see you all at future CARMA webinars. Thanks. Have a good day.